What if everything you've been told was only half the story? What if Noah, the ancient patriarch known for building an ark in a time of judgment, wasn't born where we've always assumed? For centuries, biblical stories have been passed down through a narrow lens, often Western, sometimes disconnected from the deeper truths of the ancient world. But today, we journey back to the roots, to a land where the soil still speaks the language of ancestors, where mountains pierce the heavens and sacred traditions have endured untouched by time. Welcome to Africa. Welcome to Ethiopia, a holy land, too often forgotten in the great stories of the world, yet deeply woven into the fabric of the Bible itself. And what if it was here, between the sources of the Nile and the highland skies, that humanity's new beginning truly took shape? In this journey, you'll uncover another vision of Noah's story, an Afrocentric perspective, bold, rooted in ancient texts, living traditions, and evidence that demands to be seen. Open your mind, open your heart, and prepare to rediscover what you thought you already knew. This is the history of the world, where forgotten voices speak again. In the book of Genesis, Noah is introduced as a righteous man chosen to survive a divine flood and repopulate the earth through his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. According to biblical genealogy, Ham, widely believed to be the progenitor of African nations, had sons who settled in Cush, modern-day Ethiopia and Sudan, Misraim, Egypt, Put, Libya, and Canaan. This geographic lineage strongly links Noah's descendants to the African continent. Some biblical scholars suggest that if the first post-flood civilizations developed around Ham's lineage, Noah's own roots may not have been far from there. Furthermore, ancient cartographers such as Ptolemy placed the Garden of Eden near the sources of the Nile, possibly in East Africa, based on descriptions of rivers like the Gihon, which winds through the land of Cush. Genesis 2:13. This reinforces a connection between the earliest biblical settings and the African continent. Even in Jewish midrashic traditions and Islamic commentaries, Ethiopia is mentioned as a land of ancient spiritual significance. If we combine these scriptural clues with archaeological evidence showing early human civilization in Africa, the idea that Noah could have lived in or near Ethiopia becomes less far-fetched and more plausible as a forgotten narrative suppressed by centuries of Eurocentric theology. Ethiopia has long been recognized by scientists and historians as one of the oldest continuous centers of human habitation. The most famous paleoanthropological discoveries, such as Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis, were found in the Afar region of Ethiopia. It is no coincidence, then, that this land is widely referred to as the cradle of humanity. If we accept this scientific premise, it becomes plausible to consider that humanity's earliest spiritual and mythological narratives, including the story of Noah, could have emerged or taken root on African soil. In the Bible, Ethiopia is referred to as Cush, or Cush, a powerful southern kingdom mentioned in numerous biblical passages and closely associated with the descendants of Ham, one of Noah's sons. It's important to note that in antiquity, Cush did not solely refer to modern-day Ethiopia, but encompassed a wide swath of northeastern Africa, including regions in Sudan and Nubia, areas that were home to flourishing, sophisticated civilizations. Even the geographical descriptions in Genesis raise interesting questions. The Gihon River, one of the four rivers flowing from Eden, is said to encircle the entire land of Cush, Genesis 2:13. If taken seriously, this detail could place Eden, or at least part of its river system, somewhere in Africa. With this in mind, it's worth asking, Why couldn't the Ark of Noah have been built and launched from somewhere in East Africa? The Ethiopian highlands also present a compelling geographic case. With elevations exceeding 3,000 meters, around 10,000 feet, regions such as the Simeon Mountains could easily fit the biblical description of a lofty landing site for the Ark after the floodwaters receded. While Christian tradition locates the resting place of the Ark on Mount Ararat in present-day Turkey, the name Ararat might originally have referred to a general region or concept, such as highland or sacred mountain, rather than a single peak. Ethiopian highlands could thus be legitimate candidates for such a symbolic geography. Moreover, Ethiopia is one of the only sub-Saharan African regions with a long and continuous history of Judaism and early Christianity. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church and the Beta Israel Jewish communities preserve ancient spiritual traditions that deeply reflect Old Testament themes. This continuity suggests that biblical narratives not only found a receptive audience in this region, but may have originated or been preserved there from very early on. To reinterpret Noah as an African or Afrocentric figure requires a careful analysis of multiple sources, biblical genealogy, apocryphal writings, linguistic links, and symbolic representations. In Genesis, Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, are portrayed as the progenitors of the post-flood human family. Ham is traditionally viewed as the ancestor of African peoples and some South Asian populations. His sons include Cush, near Ethiopia, Mizraim, Egypt, Put, Libya, and Canaan. If Ham and his descendants are rooted in Africa, it becomes difficult to argue that Noah himself was not at least culturally and geographically close to this African lineage. In this view, Noah's African origin is not just possible, it becomes likely. Ancient Ethiopian texts, especially the Kebra Nagast, present Noah and his descendants as ancestors of powerful nations. The Kebra Nagast traces a divine royal lineage from Noah to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, suggesting a sacred continuity that culminates in the Solomonic dynasty of Ethiopia. Though the narrative is shaped by local tradition, it demonstrates a profound integration of biblical figures into African historical memory, not just adopted, but claimed and internalized. The Book of Enoch, an apocryphal text highly revered in Ethiopia and considered canonical by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, offers detailed descriptions of mountains, rivers, celestial visions, and divine encounters. Many of these descriptions seem inspired by the landscapes of the Rift Valley and Ethiopian highlands. In this text, divine revelations occur atop mountains, aligning neatly with Ethiopia's towering terrain. These mountain settings for divine human interactions suggest a worldview deeply shaped by the geography of East Africa. Linguistically, the ancient Ethiopian language of Ge'ez shares roots with Hebrew and Aramaic, both Semitic tongues. Some linguists propose that the Semitic language family may have originated in the Horn of Africa before spreading northward. If true, this reinforces the idea that early Semitic-speaking peoples, including biblical patriarchs, could have emerged from or passed through regions in and around Ethiopia. Iconographically, medieval Ethiopian Christian art frequently portrays Noah and other biblical figures with African features: dark skin, tightly curled hair, and traditional East African garments. These depictions are not mere adaptations for local audiences. They reflect a deeply held belief that the ancestors of faith were indeed African in both body and spirit. This reimagining of Noah is not an attempt to force a modern racial framework onto ancient texts. Rather, it is an effort to restore a balance of representation, to recognize that the roots of the Abrahamic faiths are not exclusively Middle Eastern or European, but profoundly African as well. The story of Noah is one of the most enduring and universal narratives in human history. It speaks of judgment and mercy, destruction and renewal, chaos and divine order. But as we peel back the layers of tradition and rediscover hidden paths in geography, language, culture, and faith, we are invited to ask a bold and necessary question. What if Noah's story didn't just pass through Africa, but began there? When we place Noah's Ark not on the slopes of Mount Ararat in Turkey, but among the ancient highlands of Ethiopia, when we imagine the patriarch not as a distant Middle Eastern figure, but as a man deeply rooted in the soil, traditions, and spirit of Africa, we are not rewriting Scripture. We are revisiting it with fresh eyes. We are giving space for Africa's voice to rise from beneath centuries of silence, distortion, and neglect. This perspective does not diminish other interpretations. It broadens the conversation. It reminds us that the biblical world was not isolated to narrow borders, but stretched across deserts, rivers, mountains, and civilizations that shaped the very foundation of humanity. It challenges us to consider the rich, Afrocentric threads woven deep into the fabric of sacred history. By recognizing Ethiopia not only as a possible setting for Eden or the Ark, but as a spiritual and intellectual powerhouse, we honor the deep legacy of African contributions to the world's religious and historical consciousness. And by revisiting Noah's story through this lens, we restore dignity, depth, and belonging to a continent whose voice has too often been overlooked in the telling of world history. If you found this perspective eye-opening and want to explore more untold truths, hidden narratives, and powerful reimaginings of the past, subscribe now to my channel, The History of the World, where history speaks from every continent, every culture, and every forgotten voice. Let's tell the story of the world as it truly was, and as it deserves to be remembered.